Welcome to the Zoom presentation of the Mahwah Museum, The Making of a Village, Ridgewood Grows Up, 1894 to 1905. Before we begin, I want to apologize to any of you who were on the program last Monday night. We did have a glitch and we couldn't broadcast. We're sorry for that. And we assured that nothing's going to happen tonight. It's going to go seamlessly. So welcome to our Zoom presentation. Before I introduce our speakers for this evening, I want to a few announcements of upcoming events of Zoom events presented by the Mahwah Museum. On Saturday, November 14th at 11 in the morning, Life at Ramapo in the Early Years. This is part of a celebration of the 50th anniversary of Ramapo. December the 7th at 7:30, All Things Les Paul, Reflections by his son, Jean Paul. Exhibits that are rotating that are in the museum now. Palisades Amusement Park and Revealed Women's Right to Vote. These are scheduled to end in June. Permanent exhibit, we have the Donald Cooper Model Railroad, Les Paul and Mahwah. And the museum is open now, Saturdays 1 to 4. This will change as the regulations from the state and the federal government open up, hopefully in the next few months. Information about all of these programs are available on our museum website, mahwahmuseum.org. And as in all museums, we are encouraging members and we need donations. Please go to our website. You can find more information on how to become a member and how to make a donation. With that, I would like to introduce our two speakers for this evening, longtime friends of the Mahwah Museum and leaders in the history community of Bergen County, the historians of Ridgewood, Peggy Norris and Joe Suplicki. Peggy, Joe.
Hello.
Thank you, Charlie. It's great to be here today. And Joe, let's turn off our cameras. If I can figure out how to do that.
Okay.
All right, testing. Are we all okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm really glad that you all came today and are settled down for an hour of talking about history and how a village grows up. This program was developed in conjunction with the 125th anniversary of the formation of the Village of Ridgewood. And the program was given last November. The village was formed in 1894. I wanted to echo what Charlie said about museums. It's important at this time for all of us to be supporting whatever it is that we care about. And museums are certainly one of those things. And there's the Mahwah Museum. The Schoolhouse Museum, the Hermitage, the Campbell Christie House for the Bergen County Historical Society, the Pascack Historical Society in Park Ridge, and 1,000 other places. And I think we need to think about ways that we can support them either with our money, with our attendance, with volunteering to help in new ways during this new time. End of advertisement. This is Ridgewood about 1869. You can see that we're still quite agricultural. These are fields that have been cut, fields that aren't cut. Further on in the picture, there's corn growing. Here's hay in the field that's been cut and put into mounds. And we have some houses growing up. So Ridgewood is still part of Franklin Township. So we're just coming up with the background here so that Ridgewood wasn't a name of any place. There were various neighborhoods within Franklin Township, one of which was Paramus, which was the area out by the Paramus Church in what's now Ridgewood, and so forth. And for example, the Ponds was Oakland. But the people who started moving into Ridgewood after the train came through in 1848 were commuters, and they had very different interests than the people who had been living here for generations and farming the land.
Excuse me, Peggy, could I just interrupt for 1 second? I'm getting a comment that the sound is too low. Is there a way that you could turn up your audio?
Does it make a difference if I turn it up on my computer?
I think if you turn it up on your computer, I think that will help.
Testing, is that better?
I sit closer to the computer.
That will help.
So I've found with Zoom on my own computer that sometimes I have to turn up my volume on the computer I'm listening with to compensate for all the variabilities in presenters. So maybe if it's difficult to hear, that's one option to try and boost things. And I will try to project my voice as if I was in a big auditorium. So keep me posted if there's continue to be issues.
Yeah, please let me know if there's a continuing issue, and I'll pass it on.
Okay, thanks. The newcomers decided they wanted to have their own name, so they decided to start calling themselves Ridgewood. And the first time Ridgewood appears in print is on the 1861 Corey Hopkins map, and it's the area along Maple Avenue there. And gradually, the name was made more official. The Ridgewood Post Office was established in 1865, and then again in 1867. The Ridgewood train station was established in 1866. Up until that time, it had been called Godwinville, after the community where Midland Park is now. And then finally in 1876, Ridgewood Township was formed. And it was these two men on the screen who battled it out as to the naming of the post office and the station. And that was the story of the first edition of this program, part one. And so Ridgewood Township was created by an act of legislature in 1876. Joe?
Yeah. From the Bergen County Democrat in December of 1875, the new township of Ridgewood. The project to divide the township of Franklin gives general satisfaction, and it is hoped that the bill will be passed this winter without further delay. This division will be of immense advantage to both townships, separating as it does the agricultural and county lands from the village and improved property, the interests and desires of the one being diametrically opposed to the other.
So after the formation of the township, the population is steadily growing until between 1890 and 1895, we have this big jump. So from being a small place of 1,000 people, we're now up to almost 2,500 people. This is now a panoramic photo, unfortunately not of good photographic quality like the 1869 one, but this is now 1898 looking at Ridgewood. You can see there's lots more houses. There still is open land, but Ridgewood is starting to grow up.
This description appeared in the Ridgewood News in 1891 every week, plugging Ridgewood. Ridgewood is a thriving village with a population of 2,500, which is steadily increasing, showing a gain of 25% during 1890. Situated in the heart of Paramus Valley and surrounded by sloping forest-covered hills, 21 miles from New York, Ridgewood is destined to take front rank in the list of suburban places. It lies in the most beautiful and picturesque country within 50 miles of New York. The improved train service of the Erie, 62 passenger trains daily, 34 trains Sunday, puts us within 30 minutes of Jersey City. We have stores of every description, neat, clean, and prices reasonable. 2 building and loan associations in a flourishing condition, 5 churches, public and private schools, 40 houses erected during 1890, and as many more contracted for the spring of 1891. Permanent improvements is the order of the day. Commutation rate, $6.35 per month to New York.
This was the downtown in 1876. You can see the muddy dirt street and the houses serving as the stores, and at the end of the street there is the railroad station. This is the same view in 1896. So we now have brick buildings, we have trees lining the streets. The street probably is not paved, but it looks like we have stone or brick gutters and probably hard packed dirt, a little more attention paid. We have new homes being built, some for quite wealthy people, and you can see quite large in many different styles. We have 6 churches in 1890. And we have a telephone. First telephone was in 1882, 3 phones in 1894, so really gradually increasing here until we have 874 phones in 1910, and that is the Ridgewood Exchange there. They did begin to macadamize roads in 1888.
From the Hackensack Republican in September of 1890, the stone crushing company has made a decided improvement in macadamizing the Brennan Hill in front of the residence of Dr. Hanks. What was once a sand hill difficult to travel over is now a fine macadamized road avenue with a very gradual grade. From the Republican in February of 1891, Better Roads for Ridgewood. The Ridgewood Improvement Association, of which M.T. Richardson is president, has placed in the hands of every voter and taxpayer of that town a circular presenting a plan for improving the roads by raising $30,000 on bonds.
Keep in mind the Ridgewood Improvement Association. To go along with all this development, we need banking. And so the Building and Loan Association was founded in 1885.
The Bergen County Democrat in April of '85. A meeting was held on Wednesday night to organize the Ridgewood Building and Loan Association. The object of the association is the accumulation of a fund by the payment of monthly installments of $1 and interest on loans, fees, and forfeitures for non-payment of monthly dues, whereby shareholders may purchase real estate, erect buildings, etc.
Electricity came to Ridgewood in 1893, and the gas company was incorporated in 1900.
The Republican, February 1893. The Ridgewood Electric Light and Power Company filed its certificate of incorporation last Friday. There are 40 incorporators. Of shareholders, there are 116. The company will commence business with $10,000, but its full capital stock is stated at $20,000. The object is to furnish electricity for light, heat, and power. The stockholders met in the schoolhouse at 4 p.m. yesterday and were in session 6 hours trying to elect a board of directors. Nearly 100 ballots were taken before a decision was reached. With 2 tickets in the contest and a sharp canvass, the interest of the meeting was maintained to the close.
But there are also problems in Paradise, and one of them is fire.
The Democrat, Friday, March 11th, 1881. A destructive fire at Ridgewood. On Tuesday evening at 11:30 p.m., the immediate residents near Ridgewood Depot were alarmed by the cry of fire. The town election had been held during the day, and the board of canvassers were quietly at work canvassing the votes at the Franklin House. The cry of fire, fire changed the scene. The hotel was soon emptied of its occupants, and a rush was made to stop the flames, which were fast spreading and eating their way into the heart of the town. The fire originated in a barn, which adjoins the stables of the Franklin House, being used for the storage of hay. There being no fire apparatus in town, the fiery element had its own way. The buildings on the opposite side of the street were saved by the free use of water, which kept the army of attendants busy. The board of canvassers, finding themselves in warm quarters, made a hasty exit from the hotel. The judge of the elections rolled the ballot box under his arm like a cabbage and led the retreat to the dwelling of Abraham Van Blarcom, where the count was finished. In the meantime, all was in confusion. The furniture, bar fixtures, and every available thing being carried out and deposited in the street. Destroyed were the Franklin House, horse sheds, the large wheelwright blacksmith and painting establishment, 3 homes, shoemaker's shop, a boarding house, and a grocery store. It was fully 3 hours before the work of devastation was complete, and the morning following, where the day before was an all activity, life, and business, there was nothing to be seen but a charred mass of ruins. The fire covered nearly a block and has destroyed the business part of the town. The loss cannot fall short of $15,000.
Although they planned to rebuild with brick, it wasn't till another decade or more that masonry buildings became the norm in the downtown. And there were other fires in 89, 1896, 1899, 1900. In 1897, the Protection Hook and Ladder Company was organized. How much protection they could provide is probably open to question. The Gamewell alarm system that was installed so that you could pull the alarm from the street corner is still being in use today. The red box you see there is currently usable. That's a current picture, and the ad you can see underneath it. So that's from 1900. The powers that be in Ridgewood, the movers and shakers, decided they needed a central place to have the government, to have entertainment, to have meetings, to gather. And so they decided to build Ridgewood Hall. And this was even put into the Architectural and Building Monthly. And from the map on the right there, you can see that it was a large building in what's now the parking lot. That's the corner of Oak, Prospect, and Dayton. And there's what it looks like from overhead today, courtesy of Google. That green outline is where that building was, facing the Methodist Church. And this was their hope that this was going to be the center piece of Ridgewood. And this is what was built. The tower was supposed to house the fire bell. There was a bowling alley, a stage, auditorium, club rooms, meeting hall. And they had to raise money to furnish this building.
From the Republican, in February 1893, the ladies of the town have taken an active interest in devising means to furnish the new hall. A meeting was held at E.A. Walton's on Monday afternoon, which was largely attended. Committees were appointed, and steps will be taken to inaugurate a series of fairs and entertainments that will obtain the means to furnish the interior of the hall in keeping with the exterior. The Hall and Park Association has by resolution endorsed the action of the ladies, who have Mrs. E. F. Hanks as president and Miss H. Houston secretary and treasurer. The women raised $1,295.38.
So we're going back to the struggle over the formation of the township of Ridgewood in the 1870s. And there's what your merchant princes of Gotham looked like then. And we have our regular Jersey Dutch descendants on the right. And so now we're into the 1890s, and our merchant princes of Gotham look a little different. And we still have our Jersey Dutch descendants sitting in their houses reading the newspaper. So we still have this struggle going on between the commuters and the people who, the farmers and others, small businessmen who had been in the area for many generations. So there was a move to incorporate a village eventually, and this is going to tell you the tale of how that happened. It's a story that played out all over Bergen County, all about the same time and for about the same reasons. So it doesn't just apply to Ridgewood. When the township was formed, there were 11 townships in all of Bergen County. By 1902, there are 53 municipalities in Bergen County. You can see how it's all gotten broken up into smaller units of government. And up there in the upper left in that pink area is Hohokus Township, which includes all of Mahwah and Ramsey, Allendale, Hohokus, Waldwick, and that didn't break up as soon as the other townships did. And what did people want? They wanted good schools, they wanted roads, that macadamizing. They didn't want to spend any money they didn't have to spend, but like to keep the taxes low. And coming into play here is what kind of power can we have as a town? So here is a map of Ridgewood Township showing the different school districts. So before the village was formed, these are the school districts. We have school district number 45, and the school is at the by the Paramus Reformed Church. We've had school district 44 in Glen Rock. Both of those buildings still stand. The school on the bottom now has a house attached to it. School district 46 was part of Ridgewood Township, part of Franklin Township, and was in what is Midland Park today. And downtown on Union Street, we have the Union Street School, which would be the newest of those schools. But there's where the Union Street School is, and there is where people decided they wanted to build one big school. So they had to decide, what kind of school shall we build?
From the Democrat, April 27th, 1894. A large and enthusiastic meeting was held on Monday evening at the schoolhouse to discuss the proposed erection of a new school building. It was decided by ballot to buy the lot on the corner of Beach Street and Franklin Avenue, and the plans revealed what will one day be a beautiful and commodious building, replete with every convenience, even to a large gymnasium and every appliance for the latest educational improvement. A good deal of argument, pro and con, took place anent the respective merits of brick and wood, many contending that it was going backward too much in tortoise fashion to adapt the latter. Some of the old fogey stripe argued that what was good enough for their grandfathers was good enough for them, and for a time excitement ran high. Dr. E.F. Hanks and others made some spirited remarks in favor of brick building, arguing that every town of any pretense of progress had brick school buildings. The parents felt more security for their children's lives in case of fire, and brick is warmer in winter and cooler in summer. Nevertheless, we will be glad of a fine new building, whatever it is built of, even straw. The question, on being put to vote, resulted in favor of wood by a majority of 3. At this juncture, public opinion ventured to assert itself. At a school meeting, it was voted to build a large wooden schoolhouse at a cost of $35,000. But public opinion had not fully expressed itself. The women had not yet spoken. On the following day, a petition was framed and put into circulation by the women, asking the trustees to call another meeting to reconsider the resolution and to ask for enough money to build a structure of brick instead of frame. The trustees complied, a meeting was called, and almost unanimously, $47,000 was voted and a brick building ordered. The vote was 97 in favor and 28 against.
So the timing here was critical. This is May 21st, and we are now in the season of the laws of unintended consequences. And this is what set up that whole breakup of Bergen County. In 1878, there was a Borough Act that allowed boroughs to be created by referendum rather than by the legislature. For whatever reason that was passed, it was on the books and was not necessarily used very often. In 1891, there was another act similar to that one that allowed for the formation of a village. They had 2 different definitions of what kind of town they were, but basically we've got the same thing going on. Then on May 9th, the borough law amendment was that if you made a borough out of more than one township, you would get a freeholder. So you would have a voice on the board of chosen freeholders, and thus that little thing about people wanting power. So on May 21st, the same day that they approved that school building, then on May 25th, so 4 days later, so somebody knew what was going on. The new school law was passed, and this was to make schools more equitable. And they decided that rather than having all of those school districts that crossed over township line and divided up the township, each township would be one school district, and every person in the district was responsible for all of the schools in the district. Therefore, we would not have some rich schools and some poor schools. And so that was the district consolidation. It also provided that women could vote in school meetings. And our Ridgewood women were only a few days late for that, but they had made their voice heard. So now we have the perfect storm here. The people in Glenrock do not want to pay for this school building that's just been voted to be built in downtown of Ridgewood. They do not want their children walking that far to go to school if they close all the one-room schools so that they can all go to the big new school. And everybody is up in arms. So now what do people want? We want to keep our taxes down. We don't care about roads anymore. We care a little bit about power, but we really care about the schools. And a lot of people didn't want this big new school, this is what was eventually built. So Ridgewood Township broke up.
September 7th, 1894. Incorporation, Ridgewood to be a village under the Winton Act. Ridgewood has been losing its territory so rapidly of late that something had to be done to stop the borough fiends from cutting it up anymore. Midland Park, as is well known, has taken a slice from the west and Glen Rock a big piece from the south. The carving process was not to stop at these two efforts to demolish the township. A movement was started on the north to take in a portion of Orville, Hohokus, and a portion of Ridgewood, and still another movement was started on the east to capture a big slice of Ridgewood's eastern border, which, in connection with a considerable portion of Midland, Paramus, would form another borough on the east. It evidently was time to do something, and the meeting of a few citizens at the Opera House on Monday, the 3rd, morning to consider the question was not held too soon. It was decided to prepare petitions and to have them circulated at once. Lawyer Johnson of Hackensack advised strongly in favor of incorporation under the Winton Village Act of 1891, in preference to the borough form of government. There really was no alternative anyhow in selecting a form of government, because the township of Ridgewood occupies more than 4 square miles, almost 6, and therefore could not organize as a borough. 15 typewritten petitions reached Ridgewood at 4 o'clock on Tuesday, the 4th, in the afternoon, and were distributed as rapidly as possible. At 10 o'clock, the work was accomplished. At 12 o'clock, Town Clerk Bridgman and Assessor Terhune had finished their labors in going over the assessor's book to assure that the petitioners were valued at least 1/5 of the assessed valuation as required by the Winton Act. The petitions were taken to Hackensack Wednesday morning, and the application was made by Mr. Johnson to Judge Van Valen for a hearing and the selection of a date for an election to determine whether the people of Ridgewood will decide to adopt this form of government or continue a township. Once incorporated, it will be impossible for any borough to absorb any portion of the village of Ridgewood without its consent. Judge Van Valen returned from his vacation at Seagirt and filed the petition on the 27th, set a hearing date for October 8th. On October 8th, he ordered an election on the incorporation to be held November 15th, 7 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. at Ridgewood Hall. The Hackensack Republican, Thursday, November 22nd. The village election last Thursday resulted in a vote of 277 for incorporation and 62 against incorporation. And to all intents and purposes, Ridgewood Township is obliterated. The selection of 5 trustees will now be in order. Everything is moving harmoniously in connection with the governmental transaction, and it is believed that this blissful condition will continue. So mote it be.
So, in the form of government had for many years been the town meeting during the township form, and when it became a village, it became a 5-member board of trustees. They did build the school. They opened it in October of 1895. It was been known as the Ridgewood School, the Ridgewood High School, the Beach Street School, Ridgewood School number 1, and we now familiarly call it the Ed Center. It's the headquarters for the Board of Education. This is the class of 1911 in one of those school rooms in the new building. And this is them a few years later when they are graduating from high school in the same building. That's outside on the steps. So that first improvement association that I mentioned was the men, and they had one object: to get roads macadamized. And that's what they did. The ladies in 1897 decided that the village needed a lot of improvement, and they organized themselves. And we saw already how they could do that to raise money when they furnished the Ridgewood Hall, the Opera House. And they had great organizational skills and insight into what it was they wanted the village to be. And this really is, on the one hand, we have the making of the village in its government form. The ladies are coming in their Village Improvement Association to make it in its social form.
Bergen County Democrat, October 15th, 1897. Ridgewood. Mrs. McNaughton is the prime mover in an effort to establish a women's improvement society in the village. The object of such an organization is to improve the environments about the depot, etc. They also hope to establish a public library here. Over 100 ladies have signed a willingness to interest themselves in the movement.
So these are some of the women who were leaders in that organization. This is Isabella Webb Parsons, who married Delagnell Barrier. This is Henrietta Houston Hawes. She was Miss Houston on that committee to furnish the Opera House, and she's now married, and she was a secretary for 3 terms and very influential in the Village Improvement Association. We have a school in Ridgewood named after her. She was very active in civic affairs through her whole life. And she is there under the Red Cross tent selling vegetables. They did fundraising with entertainments. They had a garden party and raised $526. They had a finance committee that planned all these things. They had a performance of the HMS Pinafore in April of 1898. The Ridgewood residents performed, but they raised $200. And they had a professional entertainment of Harry and Mildred Ruclair.
The Ridgewood News, Friday, October 14th, 1898. Thursday next will be your opportunity to assist the ladies of the Village Improvement Association in their efforts to improve the village. On that evening, an entertainment will be given at the Opera House for the benefit for their benefit by the Mildred Novelty entertainers, and the house should be packed. The reserved seats are being rapidly disposed of. You can obtain one or more at the library between the hours of 4 and 6:30 p.m. Mildred and Ruclair will present Mildredism, which is still a source of wonder to those who have seen it before.
Okay, the women organized themselves by dividing into committees around various issues and objectives that they had. And one of their very first concerns was the sanitary committee and what was called the ditch. And as far as I could tell from the minute books and the newspapers, the ditch is this stream that did originally run through the downtown of Ridgewood. This is the main Ridgewood Avenue here. And basically it was an open sewer. There were no sewers. They don't have room to have septic fields. I don't even know if they were doing that at that time. And they are very concerned about the ditch. Joe?
Yep. Democrat, December 3rd, 1897. The ditch, which has been the cause of so much discussion and which is unquestionably a menace to the health of the village, is to be completely cleaned out. The stream is contaminated by cesspool overflow and sink drainage, and our health officials are now going to act.
Well, they may have acted, but the sewers were not installed in Ridgewood until 1903. But by 1916, they had 19 miles of sewer pipe and 2 sewer plants. So if we look at how waste was disposed of in the agricultural society that previously existed, they had privies. And when it filled up, you could move it or dig it out. And you had lots of space, so it didn't much matter. And now all these downtown buildings will have a cesspool, but it only drains out water through the bricks. It doesn't plan it for it to go anywhere, so it has to be emptied occasionally, and they're just emptying it right into the ditch along with all the other wastewater in the house. We have a lot of rubbish, ashes from all the fires in the cooking fires, heating fires. Cans, tin cans have made their debut, and they are a problem to get rid of. The ladies made arrangements to put trash cans downtown so that people could throw their things away. And you can see that in this photo from 1910, I think, that the garbage can says RDS on it, Ridgewood Department of Sanitation. And this was the Village Improvement Association model. You find a problem, you get a committee, you do something about it, you talk to the government people, and you try to get somebody else to take it over once you've got the ball rolling. So they started this with the garbage cans downtown, and they turned it over to the village, and of course the village still takes care of garbage. They also did set up a garbage collection service for a little while. It was a really didn't work out too well because nobody wanted to have the garbage dumped next to their place, and as things are getting more crowded, it's becoming hard to find a place to put the garbage. So that one was not so successful, but the ladies did try. They pushed quarantining and getting the Board of Health which was really just the commissioners, I think, to establish a quarantine rule and to label quarantine houses. And they did have a library committee.
The Republican, Thursday, January 13th, 1898. A brick building on the corner of Ridgewood and Rock Avenues has been leased for a term of years for a public library and is now being put in order. With new ceiling and floor, fresh paper and paint, the room will present a most attractive appearance, and the ladies in charge expect to throw it open to general view on the 24th of this month on the occasion of a book reception to be held from 3 until 10 p.m. Hackensack Republican, Thursday, January 20th. Mrs. McNaughton has donated 100 books and the Tuesday Book Club 20. The Zabriskie Building, corner of Rock Avenue, has been rented for 3 years. A donation of 2 books will secure entree to the reception tea on the day of the opening.
By February 15th, 1898, the library had 1,000 books and had received $140.50 at the reception. The library was in those other 2 buildings, the Zabriskie building and then the Pioneer building temporarily. And they made plans that wrong direction. When this new bank building was being built, that the library would rent the rooms on the 2nd floor. And in this old postcard, you can see that the sign up by the 2nd floor says library, and that would be the entrance door on Prospect Avenue. This is the site of what was Citizens First National Bank in downtown Ridgewood. And the library was there from 1901 to 1923. So this is definitely a civilizing aspect of their endeavors. And the librarians were some of the librarians, Helen Buck, Edith Buck, Catherine Chilman. Helen and Edith were the daughters of Mrs. Buck. I can't remember her first name right now, whose husband had died, and she ran a school on her property on Cottage Place, and the school, they actually built a little school building, and that's a picture of it. And this is Helen inside the school building with a class of students. But and Edith later went on to run libraries in corporate libraries, and then established the Metaphysical Library and Bookstore in San Francisco. I was really impressed with this. They rented rooms in the library. They must have rented the whole floor. So they had rooms that they could rent, and the rentals defrayed the cost of their renting. So they were like subletting, but renting on a weekly basis. And they mostly rented to other women. And so they had a teacher in there, a teacher of physical culture, a church club, and Miss Ryan, the dressmaker. So they were not only setting up a financial model for themselves to stay solvent, but they were providing a place where women could have small businesses. They had a park committee and a preservation of natural beauties committee. We need to bring back that name, preservation of natural beauties. And one of their big concerns was to remove the signs that were plastered all over the fences and the trees.
In February 1898, the VIA Committee on Preservation of Natural Beauties removed 50 signs from Mr. Graydon's property. The Democrat of February 25th, business houses are expressing indignation over the removal of their advertising signs from the trees and fences in the village by the Women's Improvement Association.
So they every summer beautified the grounds of the depot and the opera house, and made sure that they were watered and taken care of. They were involved in tree planting.
Democrat, Friday, May 3rd, 1901. A carload of shade trees arrived at the depot on Saturday and were eagerly sought for. The trees were brought here through the influence of the VIA, composed principally of ladies, whose only desire is to beautify the town. The object is an exceedingly worthy one, and the ladies deserve encouragement.
So the ladies weren't responsible for this, but in 1910, Samuel Dayton Graydon donated the first piece of land that was what eventually became the park system for Ridgewood. And that is what's pretty much now a parking lot for Graydon Pool. And where Graydon Pool is that postcard shows the cows that were there. They also were concerned about cruelty to animals and a little bit about cruelty to children. They installed watering troughs for horses. They got the muzzling ordinance on dogs repealed. They had special agents who received badges. And eventually that function sort of spiraled off into the SPCA, and they became the people who had been involved in that with the VIA took their volunteered then for the SPCA. They did get involved in one case of child abuse, and they basically told the mother to take her child inside when she wanted to discipline her instead of outside, doing it out where everybody could see what was going on. So I don't think that was a terribly useful thing, probably either for the mother or for the child. They were concerned about the hackmen at the depot, and the concern runs two ways. One way is, oh, those poor guys, they get wet when it rains, they get cold when it's snowing, and the horses have to stand there. Why don't we build them a shelter so that they can be more comfortable? The other is that they really didn't like the hackman being at the depot. They're standing on the south platform, rendering passing very disagreeable or almost impossible. They were concerned with the police, and they tried to improve the local lockup. The lockup was in lots of different places, and one of which was in an old house. And Joe's going to tell us a little bit about the Protective Association.
From the Passaic Daily News, August 5th, 1895. Excuse me. A protective association has been organized in Ridgewood. Several marshals have been selected to patrol the village. 40 burglaries have occurred in the last 2 months, and the force of watchmen is unable to cope with the thieves. The New York Daily Tribune, January 20th. Ridgewood lockup is unfit for habitation. The lockup is a square, box-like structure with 2 cells that are lined with sheet iron. The only furniture being a rough board bench with no bedding. No means are provided for heating the building.
So like as I said, the lockup was in various places. At one point it was basically a box chained to the floor of the police office. It was in a stone house, and the house was sometimes used for dogs when it wasn't being used for the prisoners. So the VIA kept trying to get them to be more humane about the way they took care of prisoners. And in 1900, they put sheet iron on the bunk over the bars. Imagine that they must have been quite uncomfortable without anything flat. And they purchased a sanitary mattress. I don't know what that meant, but you could imagine what was there or not there before. They made nightshirts and pillowcases and handkerchiefs during the Spanish-American War. And they had a street and railroad committee. And in the minutes of the VIA in 1898, the person they had hired to take care of the grounds asked for a rake so he could keep the premises better. And the VIA didn't want to spend any more money, so the officers stepped up, and Mrs. Patterson donated a rake and a broom, Mrs. Haskins donated a wheelbarrow, and Mrs. McNaughton a basket and a shovel. So if your organization isn't going to get it done, then the people involved will take things into their own hands and get the equipment to the people who need it. They also were involved in street sprinkling.
Ridgewood News, Friday, December 28th, 1900. The VIA annual report stated that Ridgewood Avenue had been swept weekly during the winter and semi-weekly in summer at a cost of $60, and that $50 had been contributed towards sprinkling the streets.
Of course, they were sprinkling the streets because of the dust that arose, and trying to keep it under control.
And the newspaper usually referred to Ridgewood Avenue as either Mud Avenue or Dust Avenue, depending on the season.
And as much water as there is between the Hohokus Brook and the ditch and the Saddle River, they had to pay for water, and they got it from Dr. Hanks out at across from the high school. And that arrow points to the windmill, which would have pumped water out of the brook. So it would go into a tank that would go in the back of the wagon for sprinkling the streets. But that's a lot of money, $200. They formed a children's auxiliary and penny provident bank that limped along for quite a few years. They finally closed it out, but they were trying to teach children that they could save money. They sponsored lectures, and I found this very interesting, the number of different kinds of people that they had taught. George Corso was a local man. He was a Klondike prospector, and they had him come and report on his adventures. Miss Julia Osgood spoke on why we should study art. Miss Susan Hayes Ward was an author and a missionary. Teresa Kelso was a librarian and a women's rights advocate. She was pretty interesting character, and I think probably a little radical for some of the Ridgewood women, but we have to only read that between the lines. They had another suffragist, and not Margaret Sanger, but Margaret Sangster, who talked about the decline of gallantry. They formed a relief society, and in 1909 and 10, and eventually this became the Social Service Association, which then it was separate from the VIA, and it still exists and has celebrated their 100th anniversary in 2009, and well on their way into the second decade of their second 100 years, and still working out of a building at the train station. And so with all of these improvements, they could even better sell Ridgewood. The mosquito-less New Jersey, go to Ridgewood, the place it pays to live. Country estate. And they're also starting to build some more middle-class housing as opposed to the estates. And they built an apartment house downtown, and that building is still there. So there's the apartment building. This is one of the big houses, and these are some of the more affordable houses. So now that downtown that we looked at in 1900, here in 1910, you can see almost all these buildings except the wooden one on the left are still there today. Well, I guess the bank on the right also is a different bank, but
Notice
downtown, pardon me?
Notice the cigar store Indian on the far left of the picture.
Oh, way over here, Joe.
Yeah.
You have to be on top of your computer to see that one.
Yeah.
And these buildings, which are still there today, or I guess the post office isn't, the one in the upper left. Anyway, Ridgewood is an up and coming town. By 1910, they had a population over 5,000, and they had 5 schools now. It didn't take long for that schoolhouse that was built in 1895 to be outgrown, and 4 more schools built. And then it was 1916, I think, that the high school, that present high school was built.
1919.
So I never get that right. So so Ridgewood is growing. Now they have 9 churches, some with new buildings. They have lots of organizations. The Masons, the Ridgewood Golf Club, which is now the Country Club, the Y, Orpheus Club Men's Chorus, which still exists, Order of Eastern Star, Ridgewood Women's Club, the Independence Day Association, Boy Scouts. All of those things still contribute to the life of Ridgewood. So the VIA from 1903 to 1923 was held together by these 5 women. Isabel Webb Parsons, Berrier, Emily Wandell Ogden Brooks, Daisy Blauvelt de Mund, Maria A.C. Kanothi, and Alice E. Parsons White. And they sort of rotated the roles and kept things going because their project that never changed was the library. So they were all committed to these various other causes as they came up, but they remained very committed to the library. And when Gertrude Pease McNaughton, then Anderson, died, she left money for a library to be built in memory of her father, George L. Pease. And the George L. Pease Memorial Library was built and then sat empty for months, if not longer, while the VIA ladies tried to persuade the village that they should take responsibility for having a library, a free public library, and it should be a village responsibility, not the responsibility of the Village Improvement Association. And finally, the village did take on that responsibility, and then they were given the George L. Pease Memorial Library building. So thank you for sharing your evening with us. The research of the minute books and a lot of these images are from the collections of the Bulger Heritage Center at the Ridgewood Public Library. And we can answer some questions.
Okay, Peggy, I have a couple that have come in already, so I encourage anyone who has questions, you can go to the Q&A, the bottom of your screen, and we'll monitor the questions there. I have a question from your good friend, Tom Dunn in Mahwah. Were there gas lights in 1876 as seemed to be shown in the picture of Ridgewood Avenue?
I think there were. I'm going to stop my screen share if I can figure out how to do that. The lighting was an issue in that early time period in the 1860s, and they did have almost like kerosene lamps, but it'd be interesting to explore. I may have the answer to that, Tom, but off the top of my head, I think you're probably right.
When the school was built, that one school for the town, it was originally gaslit, because while we had gas and electric, the gas was on all the time, but the electric didn't start until about 8 o'clock in the morning. They had to fire up the generator.
Another question came in. Was the original train station in the same place as it is today?
No. It's, if you walk down Ridgewood Avenue and go to that little parking lot that's on the east side of the train station, it was in that area on the east side of the tracks.
By the pedestrian underpass.
Another question. How did the village handle the 1918 pandemic flu, especially for the schools?
That I don't know.
They closed a lot. They opened late that year. In fact, the one of the first fatalities was someone who had just graduated from Ridgewood High School and had entered the students' reserve, and so he was considered a service-related death. That was the first death in Ridgewood.
Another question, why and when was the Opera House taken down?
It was a big old wooden building. They didn't make the same decision about building a brick building. It was hard to heat. It had been let go in terms of its maintenance. For a long time, it was the headquarters for the Y. It would have been a great asset to Ridgewood if it had been kept up and had been in that location. Perfect. But I think building a wooden building, it would not have, I mean, you couldn't have it today to be a public venue like that. They talked about it getting really drafty and hard to heat, and
it was about 1927 that it came down, I think.
I'm curious about village, the term village. Did that term have a standing in the law? I know borough and township of the state.
Form of government.
It's what?
It was the form of government.
Okay, but how does it differ from township and borough?
it had different requirements for how it was created, and Ridgewood couldn't create itself as a borough because it was too much land area to meet the definition, but they could meet the definition of village. And
so they had a president of the board of trustees was the head of the village. You had a board of trustees ran the borough, the village.
So now we call it the Village of Ridgewood, but it's no longer a village form of government. Just like we call Township of Washington township, but it probably doesn't have a township form of government either. So the form of government has become detached from the name.
Okay. The stable next to Graydon Pool, was that built during the same time period?
No, it was built earlier. It was in the 1870s. Joe, do you remember?
Yes, somewhere. Yeah, it actually shows, I think, in the 76 Atlas.
So we did a program about the creation of the township, and we look at that growth period between the railroad coming and the formation of the township in 76. And in the early 1870s, there was this huge explosion of building and people moving into town. And then there was a huge panic in 1873, and the financial markets collapsed. And Ridgewood was like, all this momentum was going, and all this building was still being pushed through in 1873, and then it just stops because of that. And really know when it started to pick up again, but certainly by the end of the century it did.
Question about the windmill on Spring behind the house, Dr. Hanks. Is that Dr. Hanks' windmill?
Yes. That was on his property.
A question from maybe you know this person, Debbie Tarvin. I thought I saw the first apartment building was owned by Zellweger. Can you confirm that? If so, Linda Zellweger was my dad's babysitter.
Henry Zellweger was from Switzerland, and he started out renting the Rouclair house. He took over Harry Rouclair's Rouclair House Hotel, and then eventually I think then he took over another one, and he eventually built one. So probably the first apartment building as opposed to a boarding house or hotel.
These are very interesting questions. I don't see any more. Does anybody else have a question or two before we close out? Well, if not, this has been a very interesting evening from the Ridgewood historians, for the historians of all of Bergen County, and particularly hosted by Mahwah. Again,
Excuse me, Charlie, I see one more question.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. Oh, there are a lot more come in. Let's see. Nancy Mackin, the middle class house on the slide showing Westina Park was my house for 18 years until 1988. Do you have any idea how much it might have cost in that day?
Well, Nancy, it's probably, there's probably some general idea from the newspaper or even from, there are some real estate books at the booklets that were promoting the town. Though I guess most of those don't give prices. But I think look in the old newspapers. If you contact um, at the Ridgewood Library, you can get access now to the Ridgewood News digital edition, and you might be able to go back in that time period and look at the newspaper ads.
Is that through the library's website, or is that newspapers.com?
It's on newspapers.com. If you live in Ridgewood, you can get access until the end of the year from home, but you can get access in the library. Anyone can, and you would make an appointment with Sarah Kiefer at the library in the Bolger Heritage Center.
And anybody interested in local history, like most of the people on here, I highly recommend that source. It's a very powerful research source for newspapers all over the country, but a lot of newspapers, northern New Jersey. And we can close.
I have something. I was just looking at the question about the windmill on Spring.
Yes.
No, that was not Dr. Hank's windmill. That was Henry Hale's windmill for Florimir. He was a florist.
Okay, so that was for the property around there?
That was, on the house behind the Spring, the windmill on Spring Avenue behind the house was not Dr. Hank's. That was Henry Hale's.
The photograph that showed Dr. Hank's house, that house is across from the high school on Ridgewood Avenue, and
So it's on Brookside.
The windmill was, that lower structure was taken down only in the last decade or two, but that was all there. So no, they're two different windmills. That's correct.
So I want to thank you again. And the president of the Mahwah Museum, Kathy Hajo, thanks you. All of our participants, thank you. And the Mahwah Museum will continue with a series of these lectures, local history, and highlight particularly Mahwah's region, and northern New Jersey. So thank you again, and thank you for all of you who attended, and look forward to seeing you on December the 7th for Les Paul, and November 14th for the history of Ramapo College. Take care.
Thank you so much, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. This has been very interesting. Good night, all.